Welcome to the Raven Lunatics episode 4. I'm Dwight MacPherson, comic creator, editor, and I'm joined by my friend.
I'm Chris Sutner, the curator of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia.
Awesome. There you go. There's number one. I have to put a quarter in a jar every time I say awesome, so I need an awesome.
Here we have special guest Dwight MacPherson this week.
Are you serious? How did we get him?
I don't know, scraping the bottom of the barrel. I hear he's come out with a comic series.
Yes.
About Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes. That's correct. It's called The Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe. And it's a 12-issue series that we're releasing single issues through Kickstarter. They're only available through Kickstarter, these exclusive editions. And issue 4, the Kickstarter will kick off the Kickstarter on June 1st. So we're really excited about that.
And where can we look up more information about it?
You can look at hpcomics.net, where you can sign up for our newsletter. You'll get all the news first there, and that will be starting June 1st as well. So we are really excited. This is a book that I don't know. I guess you'd say it's my magnum opus. It's kind of like my love letter to Edgar Allan Poe to say thank you for your amazing work and the impact that it's had on me over the course of my life and my writing career.
Well, how did this whole thing start? How did it begin? Was it derived from the surreal adventures of Edgar Allan Poe, or is it something that came before that?
Yes. When an author releases a new edition of his book, he can revise it. And there's no problem with that because he's the only one, him and an editor are the only ones involved in doing that. But when you want to revise a comic book, what do? And what we ended up doing was actually having the entire story redrawn, recolored, relettered. And I was able to edit the script and make some changes that I really wanted. And I'm really thrilled because Luis Cerniowski, I actually approached him first. When I was going to pitch the book to Image, I actually approached him first and said, I would really like you to draw this. And he couldn't. He was doing something for IDW, another publisher at the time. So I ended up going with another artist. But it was just really cool to actually be able to work with him to come back around to revise it and release it again. I think it works so much better now. Not to second guess myself or anything, because that was never my intent. But with my contract being up with Image, I was free to do with it what I wanted to. One thing I always wanted to do was to tell the last chapter of the story. I'd always intended it to be 3 books. So I was finally able to do that and to do it on my own terms and do it the way I wanted to do by self-publishing. That's why we created HP Comics, ultimately was to create these books, to revise these and release them. So we're doing it.
All right. So you set the stage. Where does it start with the story?
Well, the story starts very shortly after the death of Virginia, as you well know. And it kind of takes him through that dark time, arguably the darkest time in his life. And what the book actually proposes is that he had a psychic split during that time. And as you know from studying the last years of his life, there was a shift there that occurred right around the time of Virginia's death. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that he did a lot of things or acted differently, did things that were kind of out of character for him in those last couple of years, getting engaged again, and, the way that it worked out and everything. So I'm saying that he had a split. He had a psychotic split at that time. And that's where our story comes about. That's where we meet him. So.
And this really takes you on a journey into another world with figures from Greek mythology, with talking rats.
Yeah.
Are these Poe references, or are these just references coming from you, or is there some significance to them?
Well, I've always asked, a lot of the dreams that we have now, we dream, I've had dreams with Thor and, with some of the Avengers and some of the things that I see on TV. But what do people dream about before television? and I imagine that they dreamt about things that they had read or plays that they had seen. And so I don't think it's a stretch to say we know that Poe, at least had a fondness for mythology. And also in the book, you'll see characters that pop up from his works as well. We have the Raven King who shows up in there. We have Queen Lenore, who lives in her castle, her kingdom by the sea. So it's really an amalgamation, I would say, of the influences and the things that Poe studied and enjoyed during his time, and also some of his works come to life. So I think it's really unique. And once again, I mean, that's really what I would ask is, what did people dream about, prior to television and prior to movies? And that's really what I was latching onto there. As far as, having animals and such, we've talked about that before. Poe loved animals. He liked animals. So I don't think it's a stretch also to have so many animals in the book. Now, my choice of some of the animals are probably, may make people scratch their head, but there's a reason for why a lot of the characters in the book are rats, and why there are other creatures as well. Except Terrence. Terrence is just cool. I mean, he's a fiddler crab. He actually has the fiddle. He's a lot of fun. So I don't know. It's different.
Terrence was in the studio there with you tonight.
Yes, he was. Let me go grab him for you. Terrence Crab. Let me tell you, this bad boy is heavy, and you kick that in the middle of the night, and you're going to speak in Norse, Danish, and, several other languages, right? So, yeah, I had to get him. He just needs a top hat. If he had a top hat, he would be perfect.
So you've had a pretty good success.
I mean, you met me. What's that?
You've had a pretty good success with the Kickstarter so far. I think the last one, you reached your goal in an hour or two.
We did. I think it was 2 hours that we reached our goal in, and it's wonderful because I've been able to connect with so many Poe fans, and especially here recently, I've actually offered the first issue free to educators and librarians. So if they want to get a free copy of this book, which is being used in classrooms already, in some classrooms already, they can contact me at info.hpcomics@gmail.com, and I'll send a PDF of the first issue. It's high res. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. You can blow it up as big as you want to. You can put it on like Times Square, and show it to people. So I think it makes a great resource for teaching Poe or for, teaching mythology, because I think it works. So it's a classic hero's tale. So, a lot of my inspirations were things like the Iliad and the Aeneid, Homer in general. I love Homer's work. Dante's Inferno, the Divine Comedy. You definitely can see where a lot of the classical references, some of my favorite works of literature work into the book as well. So it's just I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's really my love letter to classic literature as well. Being able to take so many things and put them together. So it's a big, glorious mess, kind of, all thrown together. So, I mean, you met me right after the first book was released, right? We met at the Library of Virginia.
Yeah.
For Poe, Man, Myth, or Monster. And I remember you were very complimentary of me during that time, and I really appreciate it. That meant a lot to me, to hear from the Poe curator saying, wow, I really like this. This is really cool. So, thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
I just think it's cool that people from all different walks of life can enjoy the book, old, young. I really think that all ages comics are where it's at. I mean, we can put them in the classroom, we can put them in the library, we can stand them up against literature, and I know in Europe and Asia they actually do that. America, not so much, right? I mean, I think it's getting better. I mean, Watchmen is actually in the Time Top 100. So, I mean, you can look at that and say, well, that's good, but there's probably several others that deserve to be there as well that are not quite there yet. I know the New York Times actually used to have a comic section in their New York Times bestseller list, and they actually pulled the comic portion of that. It's really perplexing. I don't understand. Academia, they're on the train all the way. You know, so many educators are using comics in the classroom now. And, you know, I don't know. I really don't know. It's perplexing.
I know here in Richmond, Tom Inge over at Randolph-Macon College has written a lot about the comics of the 20th century up until today. And he's done a lot to try to get some recognition for Poe in the comics, Mark Twain in the comics. Because it's still an uphill battle. So a lot of people think of it as a lesser art form, but there was a time when they thought of photography as a lesser art form. That wasn't a real art form. You had to be a painter or a sculptor. If you were an engraver or a graphic artist, that was beneath painting and sculpture. And then if you were a photographer, you weren't a real artist. But times change, and gradually these things get acceptance. There was a time when television was just considered a piece of furniture.
Yeah.
And now, with some of the great films that are out there on Netflix and on broadcast television, we realize, you know, this is really a great art form. So comics are coming along, and the more people see them, the more people read them, the more acceptance they'll get over the years.
That's true. Well, that's what my hope is. I mean, like I keep alluding to Europe and Asia, you know, where comics are not only accepted, they're in the mainstream. You know, you would think with all the comic movies that are, you know, the movies that are being made that are based on comic books, you would think that would drive sales of comic books themselves, but it hasn't worked out that way. You know, I mean,
that's because the comics now are, well, the superhero comics are things that everybody knows about, but they don't read it.
They don't, and they don't translate to sales. And I really have to wonder, you know, whose fault is that? I mean, is that the direct market's fault, or, you know, that's my own personal feeling, is that the direct market really, it drove comics out of the mainstream and put them into little buildings where you have to go to, you know, much like adult bookstores. So they took it out of there. I mean, I can remember, and, you know, I'm sure you can remember as well, when we would go into 7-Eleven or we go into Walgreens. They didn't have Walgreens and stuff like that back when I was a kid, but, you know, go into the dime stores and go into the convenience stores, and you could always find comics. You know, they had the great spinner racks. You know, I can remember going into 7-Eleven and buying 2 or 3 comics and a big gulp and taking that and going home. But we took it away from there. And that's still perplexing if you actually study the switch from direct market or from, you know, broad market to this very, you know, it's kind of funny. It's like, you know, in every other market, they're like, how can we expand our market, right? How can we get our product in front of more people? But comics didn't do that. They were like, how can we get it to a smaller market? We can just put them in these stores right here, you know, and have our own customers here. It's such backward thinking. It's incredible to me that a bunch of, you know, people with money said, this is a great idea. Let's do this. But it's hurt comics here in the United States. When I went to, when I was in France, for instance, I did a signing there. I mean, they treated me like I was Stephen King, you know. The artist that I was there with, he's like, hey, bring us some beer. And they were like, okay, yes, sir. And I mean, whatever we wanted. And we had lines, you know, I met so many people that day and signed so many books. I mean, they treat you like you're a rock star, you know, over there if you make comic books, because they don't have like a comic book section. It's all together, you know, whatever the topic, you know, it's topical, set up topically in bookstores. So, you know, you see great works of fiction, you know, regular literature right next to comic books there. There's no, and they treat them equally. The same in Asia. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why we decided to, you know, to take them away from the masses and give them to a few people, and then think that it was a good thing for the comics medium, because the comics medium is so much more than superheroes. It's so much more. Which is not to say that superheroes are bad. You know, I enjoy superheroes, especially on the big screen. But there are so many other great works of literature. I will say, yes, literature that are out there in comic form. And you've read several yourself, you know, you found enjoyable. Yeah.
And comics aren't the same as a novel or a short story. They're their own medium. So it's a combination of visual art and the narrative. So it's different than just an illustrated book. It's different than just a novel that you'd read from one to the other, different than a movie. And it's got certain limitations, but also certain advantages. There's certain things that make a comic a comic. And you just can't replace it with something else. They've tried to copy the aesthetic in certain films, and it just hasn't come out quite right.
No, it sure hasn't. I think of Ang Lee's Hulk.
Hulk?
Remember that Hulk movie he made? Oh my gosh. My kids kept going, Dad, when's Hulk going to come? I'm like, I don't know. I've never seen this before, right? Yeah, but they had the sliding comic panels on the big screen. I was like, what the heck is this, Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It hasn't worked out. But the comics are so unique. I mean, what they can be a marriage of literature and art. Okay? For every movie, television shows as well, they have storyboards that they use for filming. Storyboards are comics. If you put, word bubbles on them, they're comics. So a lot of comic artists are also working in Hollywood doing storyboarding for films. So that's awesome for them, because you don't make comics to get rich. You make comics because you love the medium. And, they also have to eat, right? You have to eat. So a lot of artists have made that transition over to at least part-time doing storyboarding for movies and animation and such. So there's nothing wrong with that, And, Jack Kirby is famously quoted for saying, "Kid, comics will break your heart." And they really will if you think you're going to make a living making comics. But it's a wonderful art form that I love. I've loved this since I was a kid. And people keep saying, "Why are you making comics? Why don't you write literature? Why don't you write some novels?" I love comics. I want to do both, but my first love is comics. Well, making. I love literature. Literature is my number one love. But as far as actually producing, I love making comic books. Collaboration process is wonderful. So, yep.
Now, do you prefer the digital or the actual paper, the physical object of the comic?
I prefer a physical copy of the comic. I love the smell of the pages, the feel of the book in my hand. Not to say that I don't read digital comics, because I get a lot of comics sent to me that are digital that I read as well. The cool thing is you can have your library in this little device. You can have thousands of books in this one little device. And, if you were to look through my house, I mean, we have bookcases everywhere, that are filled with books. I mean, every time you move, it's like, building the Great Pyramid of Khufu, because you have so many books. So it's really cool to be able to actually have a whole library in one little device. But I love the physical comic books. I love books. I love everything about books. How about you? Do you read any digital books?
Some, but I prefer the paper. I prefer to be able to carry it with me. If it's really good, I can read it while I'm walking or something, and just have the paper.
Yeah, me too.
But when it comes down to, if I'm on an airplane or something, then digital will just have to be the way it is, because there's only so many books you can fit on there with you.
Right. So there's definitely benefits to both. And I don't have a problem. I'm not one of those guys that's like, "Oh, you shall have the printed page only." No, I don't believe that. I think it's great. And as long as people are reading, that's the important thing, right? You just want people to read. So I can remember when I was in school and I got caught with comic books in the class. And I mean, the teacher made me stand up and embarrass me in front of the whole class. "Look what Dwight's reading. He's reading Superman," and all the kids laugh and everything. And it's funny because now comics are in the classrooms. They're being used by teachers. They're being used by professors. And they've gone away from being the ha 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 kid thing to actually being accepted by a broader audience. But I think that's academia that's actually responsible for that. I don't think the comics industry can take any credit for that. But it is what it is.
Now, when you're working with artists, how much do you leave up to the artist's interpretation?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It's a collaborative art form, isn't it?
It is a collaborative art form, and depending on how much faith you have in an artist. Like the artists that a lot of the artists I work with, I've worked with over and over and over again. So a lot of them, I will tell them, listen, if you want to add a panel, if you want to take away a panel, if you want to show a different angle for shot, because I'm very specific in comic scripts. I mean, I'll tell you, like you have a 2-shot, or you have a wide angle, or upward angle shot, or a bird's eye view. And, I lay it out pretty much like a shooting script. But, depending on the artist, if I know them really well, I'll say, listen, you know what I'm trying to put across here. You can get the emotion that I'm trying to get. If you think an upward angle, which would serve better here, do that. So, yeah, it really depends on my comfort level with the artist. And I don't know, a lot of times they can do 2 or 3 pages for you, do some roughs or some layouts, and you can really get a sense of, because there are a lot of artists out there, but visual storytelling is a different thing altogether. That's why you have people that only do covers. They're sequential art. They're not good visual storytellers. It's impossible to understate how important that is. It's not just important to be able to draw well, because there's a ton of people that can draw well, but how well can you tell the story? If all the bubbles were removed, would people be able to know what's going on? Would they be able to follow the story? If the answer is no, you got work to do. If the answer is yes, then fantastic. I want to work with you, because a great visual storyteller is hard to find. And you can probably tell, well, not probably, you can tell the difference. You look through some comics and you just really see, if you were just to look at the pages, you can figure out what's going on. You don't even have to read it. So those are the kind of people that I want to work with. I want to work with people that are highly skilled storytellers, Yeah.
Yeah, like a Norman Rockwell. Just one Norman Rockwell painting is a whole novel, and you can look at how all the characters are interacting. That's why so many filmmakers love Norman Rockwell.
Absolutely. I love Norman Rockwell. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the man storytelling was in his blood. And you definitely want to find artists like that, to work with in my field. So anyways, I'll just wrap it up here and say that June 1st, we're going to launch our Kickstarter for The Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe issue 4. And now I want to know what's going on with you. What's going on with the Poe Museum, Chris? And how's sales of your book going, your new book?
Well, the sales seem to be coming along pretty well on the Poe Shrine. It's still available on Amazon, and
awesome.
Looks like they're in their second printing now. So that's a good sign. I hope more people pick it up. I'll try to do some more book signings. And at the Poe Museum, we just had our first unhappy hour of 2018. We got a lot of people really miserable and depressed. And we did a reading of Ligeia, along with live music by Hotel X and refreshments by Carytown Burgers and Fries. This is a good event. Just today we had Lisa Samia speaking in the Enchanted Garden about some of her poetry. And she's someone who's an award-winning poet who's just come out with another book. And she says when she was 10 years old, she read Annabel Lee for the first time, and that's what kicked off her love of poetry, and she wanted to devote her life to poetry just because of that one poem.
That's so cool.
So it's a good talk, and we're lucky that she came out and that people there were to listen, and hopefully they're going to leave inspired and maybe even write their own poetry.
That is
and then our next speaker, we're trying to get J. Gerald Kennedy next weekend on Mother's Day. He is the author of several books, including A Historical Guide to Edgar Allan Poe and Poe and Race, Poe, Death and Mourning. And also he's written the introduction for the new edition of the Portable Poe. So he's definitely a good one to see if anybody's in Richmond next weekend.
That's very cool. We need to see about getting him on the show as well.
Yeah.
That'd be really cool. Yep. So that's excellent.
So thanks for being on the show tonight as a guest.
Hey, I'll be back next week. How about that? Why don't we just make it like an ongoing thing?
Yeah, you can be a guest every single week, and that'll be pretty good.
We are reaching out to people, and as we've said, if you would like to be on our show, just let us know. You can send an email to the Raven Lunatics at gmail.com. Okay. My wife is like, yep. Yep, the Raven Lunatics at gmail.com. And we would love to have you. And it's not just for artists and writers, but, you know, as Chris has said many times, if you do an interpretive dance and you've been inspired by Poe, we want to talk to you about it. Anyone who's been inspired by Poe's work, we would love to have you on the show and talk about, you know, what he means to you and how he's influenced you. And, you know, come on the show. Leave your name in the comments, beep, down there. And be sure to like this video and share it and subscribe to the page. And we're going to keep making these things. And we're going to, as long as the two people continue watching, right, Chris? Isn't that how it goes, right? Yeah.
Both of you know who you are. Keep watching.
Tell your friends, you know, because 2 becomes 4, you know, and then 4 becomes 6. Yeah. Excellent. Well, I guess that's all we've got for this week, but you have anything else you'd like to let us know about, Chris? Anything else going on?
Thanks to Pete for putting it all together.
Pete is the man.
And
Hi, Pete. We can see him, but you can't. Hi, Pete.
Well,
that we'll have Pete on. Oh, am I breaking up here?
You're unbroken.
We'll do a show in the future where we'll actually have Pete on here as well, and he is a Poe fan himself, so we really can't say thank you enough to Peter, because I mean, when I came up with this idea, it was just an idea, and I don't think it would have happened between me and Chris, you know, if it weren't for Peter stepping in there and saying, hey, you know, I can make that happen. And he's won all kinds of awards. He is really a brainiac when it comes to a lot of things, actually. I'm really impressed. You know, it's funny, we get asked all the time, are you just the writer or are you the artist also? Well, Pete wears many hats. The man can do a ton of things that are cool. So I really appreciate his friendship, and I really appreciate him, what he's done for the show. So Pete, we love you, man. All right. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you in 2 weeks, right? Not next week. I always say next week. We will see you in 2 weeks. So we are signing off for now. See you later.
See ya.